The other one was sent over, I do believe, just this morning by Brian. Yes, Brian, is that correct?
Yes.
So Brian sent over this article written by Robert Coles, The Values Americans Live By. And what Brian, well, Brian, why don't you go ahead and just share with everyone why you thought this was an interesting thing to share?
Well, when I was I was told that I'm the word I keep hearing that I'm tense,
Oh,
and so I
intent.
changed I'm intensive. So I changed my position and how I'm working with these others here who might not see and share the same compassion and passion for the vision as I do.
Yes.
And so when we've been having these conversations, someone covertly kind of sent me this as to imply perhaps this is why uh, I'm considered uniquely
Okay.
different than
So
them.
let me, the other people on your little committee or on your little team there, whatever, are they Americans?
Yes,
They are.
yeah, and that's
Interesting.
why. So when I seen on and as I'm looking at this list here, and I see control or like the top things there, I say, okay, yeah, but is this like unique for most cultures? So I don't know who,
Well, yeah,
what
yeah,
these
yeah, yeah.
comparative studies where he came up with this, but this is what they covertly are using as why they're not as compassionate
Okay. All right.
about this.
Let's
Uh,
dive into this, and we will probably need to finish the discussion on Thursday to get this all going. But all right. Somewhere there's this belief that there is a unique set of values that Americans live by. Whether some of those values are served or shared by others, I'm sure would be a fascinating exploration all on its own. But I would probably predict that the more there is overlap in the values between Americans, if such a things exist, and any other country, the more of an overlap in values, the more likely we are to consider them an ally. And the more differences there are, probably, well, no, they're different. So values, that's what we're going to need to be looking at, culture by culture. So anyway, the thing I want to throw out before we go any further on this all is that he published this in 1988. That's
mhm.
35 years ago. So this actually allows us to also say not only are these values American values, but are these values that have endured to present day, or have our values actually altered as time goes on? And then, of course, we have to be careful because right now there's two very different Americas.
Mm.
Well, at least two. There's two big, very different Americas that are at very different ends of the value spectrum. And so we might be saying some of these values resonate with one party or camp or philosophy, and the others might resonate more with the other. And hopefully, a whole lot of them are in the middle. Because again, the only way that we're ever going to heal the country is by finding and focusing on common ground. That's what has to be done before anything else has a chance of succeeding. If it continues to polarize, that leads to increasing conflict, and that's what has to be nipped in the bud. Nipped in the bud. So anyway, so he says that if foreign visitors really understand how deeply ingrained these 13 values are in Americans, they will then be able to understand 95% of American actions, which might otherwise appear strange, confusing, unbelievable when evaluated from the perspective of foreigners' own society and its values. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough, fair enough. Let's get into these list of 13 specific sorts of things. So this is his preamble, 1988. Wonderful. Don't even know what's going on. So commentary on the list of basic American values. Number one, personal control over the environment / responsibility. Americans no longer believe in the power of fate, and they have come to look at people who do as being backward, primitive, or hopelessly naive. To be called fatalistic is one of the worst criticisms one can receive in the American context. To an American, it means one is superstitious and lazy, unwilling to take any initiative in bringing about improvements. All right. Now, well, I guess we can do these one at a time. So, in the United States, people consider it normal and right that man should control nature. Yeah, how's that playing out? Rather than the other way around. More specifically, people believe every single individual should have control over whatever in the environment might potentially affect him or her. The problems of one's life are not seen as having resulted from bad luck as much as having come from one's laziness and unwillingness to take responsibility in pursuing a better life. Okay. Furthermore, it is considered normal that anyone should look out for his or her own self-interests first and foremost. Most Americans find it impossible to accept that there are some things which lie beyond the power of humans to achieve or control. Americans have literally gone to the moon because they refuse to accept earthly limitations. Americans seem to be challenged, even compelled, to do by one means or another, and often at great cost, what 7/8 of the world is certain cannot be done.
You know, when I read this list, it sounds like there's a lot of romanticism of the culture. Like if I would just come into the country, this would sound like this is something I would expect to see on those reality shows or something. Like that's how I went through the list. It just didn't seem like even America that I know. You know what I mean?
Really? Okay. Yeah. Well, and I do think things are evolving. Other comments?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Was it crazy 35 years ago?
That's
Oh,
that's probably why it sounds so crazy, because I don't think this is what most Americans value. Maybe back then, I don't think even back then.
yeah, I don't even think back then. I think I've been in the States not 35 years, but close.
Okay.
But I don't remember that as what would draw me to
Yeah.
come to the States.
Well, how about this though? All right, I'm 66 years old. Let's go back 56 years ago when I was 10 years old and going to school. I really do think what I've just read is what I was being indoctrinated with.
Really?
These are the messages we were being told from the time we were little kids, that Americans can do anything. Brian, we've been told from kindergarten, if not before, that we live in the greatest country on earth, that no country has ever been close and no country will ever be close.
Mm.
That we are the model for how every other country should strive to be. Okay, that's the message we were really very much drilled into us over and over and over.
And you know what? I believed that for a very, very long time.
Exactly.
Until I got older and started studying other cultures, and I went, wait a minute, they've got a pretty good thing going there. We're the best. We're not the best.
Right. And the other thing is that certainly we were told from the time we were little kids that we can do anything. We've never been told that we have restrictions or boundaries or things that would be possible or whatever. We're here to prove that anything that anything the mind can conceive. What's the rest of that phrase, everybody?
We can achieve.
We can achieve. This was always it, that records were made to be broken, that records were, and if you looked at the records, the goal was to have as many of them be American as absolutely possible. That played out at the Olympics, that played out in the world of science and education. When you name the greatest universities on earth, you ask the Americans to name for you the greatest universities on earth, you are not likely to hear, even today, universities outside of the United States. Now, those of us that
Mm.
have traveled would say, well, yes, certainly we got Harvard and Yale and MIT and all those, but there's also, you know, things like, name your favorite.
Oxford.
There's Oxford,
Oxford.
right,
Mhm.
right. And so, but the truth is that you don't go to Oxford. I don't think you go to Oxford for hardcore sciences. I think if you look at the great universities of Britain, there's probably one that's very much focused on sciences. I don't remember which one it was. It was Oxford, always Oxford versus
I forget the other one.
Cambridge.
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 Cambridge, and maybe one of them was more about the fine arts or the social arts, the intellectual arts,
Mhm.
and another one was more about the practical sciences, things like that. I really don't know. I mean, I went on the tour just back in May, but obviously I didn't pay any attention. So yeah, again, without harping on it, you know, longer, although we're up at 2 minutes, I can tell you that most Americans find it impossible to accept that there are some things which lie beyond the power of humans to achieve or control. I say that is pretty much still very strong in Americans. Maybe some Americans are still going like, yeah, but at what cost? You know,
Mm.
maybe that's what's evolving is we're recognizing that there's a cost involved in
Yeah,
something.
yeah. The cost is conflict.
The cost is
I mean,
conflict, yeah.
think of energy right now. There's a whole side of the country that thinks that green is the way to go, and a whole side of the country that thinks that fossil fuels are necessary.
Right. And
I
why
mean,
can't both of those things be true?
and be
Mm.
possible, right?
Fine,
But
we're there.
there's a war between them.
There certainly is. And even
And you know what? The same thing, and I think Brian might agree with healthcare.
Mhm.
There's countries all over the world that have universal health care and better outcomes than the United States. But we
Yep.
think our healthcare system is so good.
But we're dying faster of other things, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's all there. And so I do think that that this idea about that we think anything, okay, I think it was written for an Obama speech at some point, but I remember the phrase was that anything that's wrong with the country can be fixed by everything that's right with the country.
Mm.
So I don't know who said that, but I thought that's a really good line, and somebody wrote that. So, so, but if you look at examples, even in the energy spectrum, like fracking, well, someone believed fracking is the way to go, but they didn't see what's one of the consequences of fracking?
Earthquakes.
Earthquakes. And so things are collapsing and things are whatever, you know. We don't need to, if you guys know, there was a movie that was produced very long ago. I've always been a fan of it. It's called Koyaanisqatsi. It was a Francis Ford Coppola sort of a thing. And everybody, you know, famous people were involved in this kind of thing. But basically, it was explaining some Hopi or other native prophecies without ever using a single word of dialogue. And the big one is that if we dig precious things from the earth, we shall invite disaster.
Mm.
And so, you know, anything that's on the surface, you're welcome to use. But if it's inside of Mother Earth, it's there for a reason. And so, you know, you're inviting disaster. Well, some of this stuff is holding true. But nevertheless, it got to be the way where the way that it is, Brian, because this is something we were indoctrinated by. Um, I can't speak to recent generations, the schooling the kids are experiencing today, or even a decade ago, but I know that when all of us were in school, this would have been a very, very starting point. They didn't even need to drill it into us. We walked into the schoolroom already believing this because of all the other places the message was communicated to us.
That's interesting. So some of these, um, I guess you can call them permission structures that would allow this elitism kind of
Yeah.
attitude to exist seem like they were breaking down, because there's even talk about like what will happen if the U.S. loses superpower status,
Yeah.
and how like even um, in terms of BRICS, India and China students will go to the States to study the science and
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
the
Yep.
math, and that
Yep.
stuff spawns innovation. But now they're staying home
Yep.
And we see the downfall of universities today in the States. So I think some of that, and number one is cracked or dismantling or shifting or something.
Yeah. Well, but again, we're always on that journey up the spiral. And so and remember, the spiral dynamic is the study of the evolution of human values. So we're talking about values in the US. This still has to be subjected to a change as we move up the spiral dynamic. So all this is going on. But I can certainly tell you that if you go back a generation before ours or a couple of generations before ours, the one thing that we prided Americans on more than anything else was self-sufficiency. You needed to move out of the house when you were 18. You needed to get a job. You cover your own expenses. You take care of your own. You don't get handouts from people. You don't get charity. All these social services and all that. That's socialism. That's robbing an American of what being an American is all about, which is about being self-sufficient. You are the master of your own destiny, blah, blah, blah. And so that's why initially any kind of social service, what do we say? A social service that was being offered was considered something that was somehow or another enabling the weak. Instead of allowing natural evolution to occur. So why are we saving those that are struggling? Why don't we let them deal with their own struggle and let Darwin take its course, So that was the mindset. And a great, remember, this is a country of immigrants. So this country was built from people who came here not expecting anything to be done for them whatsoever, but to have to find their way in a hostile, inhospitable environment where there was no guarantee of anything other than you were going to work hard for whatever it is that you got. But what people wanted back then was a chance to work hard, a place that they could go where by working hard, they would be able to achieve their own destiny, their American dream, their whatever it is. And so, Brian, these things are deeply, deeply, deeply ingrained in us.
I see. My goodness.
Yeah, but you can see where it plays itself out even today. We don't need a national health care program. No, because people should take care of their own health and blah, blah, blah. That's just more big government, blah, blah, blah. And so,
And see, those things are fascinating to me because if you look at, again, how we design workplaces, the structures that will either make work harder for people. So in other words, policies and procedures, right? So these are things people don't have control over. They can't change the organization.
Right. But if you...
And so they impact them and they impact their health.
Right. But you go back to when these values were first being developed, established, formalized, installed, whatever word you want to use, that business owner would have said, if you can't do the work, then get out.
Or die.
Or die. Who cares? Why do we need to be, you got to think about Ebenezer Scrooge in the story of, this is exactly the mindset of how a lot of the industrialists were about all that. You can't handle 12 hours a day without a break, without adequate food and healthcare and all that. Well, then fine, let the strong survive. We'll end up with a stronger thing because
and so what I think is what's evolving is that all of the people that grew up with that so ingrained are now shifting toward, no, we do have to take care of the people and we can't exploit the people that are working. Do you know what I mean? That are working hard and trying to get ahead. Let's everybody work together. I think that are the values that are beginning to change.
They are beginning to change, but if we look about how this country was formed in its early stage, those concepts were as foreign as they could be. The big thing was that people wanted to come to the US to have freedom to become the best version of themselves they could be. And the one thing they were all against was government, whether that government was about kings and queens or about people who were self-appointed as authorities over everybody else, they were against it. And so that's why to this day, if you think about the biggest difference between the conservative side of things and the liberal side of things is conservatives say, we don't need bigger government. We don't need the government to have more control. We need it to be decentralized. We need it to be left closer to the individual than it is to the collective. And that's really it. Conservative, behavior. Yeah. And then the liberals are kind of going like, yeah, but we need to blah, blah, so.
This is fascinating.
Yeah, it's always part of the dynamic. Obviously, we've gone over our time significantly, but I did chat this over to everybody, and then we can see what a review change seen as natural and positive. Does that continue to be an American value, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah.
Very
Okay,
interesting.
final comments before we're done for today?
Yeah, this is
No.
very interesting because I had never thought about it in that sense, that yes, these were the values that we were raised with, and very slowly, those values I look back on and think, oh, wow, did I ever really think that we were, it
Yes,
really
of course
sounds
we did.
horrible now to think that we're the best.
We
Everybody
absolutely
else
did.
is peons.
Well,
Horrible.
right. And think about before there was media and before anyone would have traveled, the only messages we would have heard would be from our teachers, clergy people. Maybe there was a radio. I'm going back all the way to the evolution of how America formed. There was no radio. You were lucky if there was a little newspaper that was being spread around. Everything was word of mouth, and you had to trust the sources and on and on and on. And so, yeah, so this stuff was very much ingrained in us from the very, very beginning. Very, very.
This is really interesting to me because it lets me know what I'm up against. Like two of these team members are about the same age as myself, but many of them are older. And so like they come on these projects and they're, serving as something extra that they want to do in their own time, but they just don't have, and I don't mean in a judgmental way, the same kind of intensity, sense of urgency that I have. And I think that's why they keep saying, yeah, this guy is intense. But when I explain my background, they seem to get it. But then they offer this as kind of like, hey, this is, who we are kind of a thing. It's
Who
the
we
way
are.
I
Oh, yeah.
took it.
And Brian, keep in mind, again, we've only looked at number 1 out of 13, but keep in mind, it is this value system that led us to where we are today. And yeah, there's good stuff and bad stuff. But when you look at where the US is positioned in the world, it's not positioned in a bad place. This mindset may very well have been vitally instrumental in us becoming the country we became.
Right.
Now we have to continue to evolve. So we can't say this didn't work. It did work, but it worked.
Right.
It brought certain consequences as well. And to give you one last example of this, when it comes to personal control over like the environment, there was a big problem in the 1800s with overforestation of the country. We needed wood for multiple kinds of things. And if you look at North Carolina and all that general area of the country, that had pretty much been clear cut. So there were no trees left. The mountains were bald because they were just harvested, and no one understood it. Well, it happened to have been George Washington Vanderbilt who built the Vanderbilt mansion, or the Biltmore estate in Asheville, North Carolina. He's known for that, but what he is actually better known for as being the father of American forestry. So when he bought all that land, it was bare. And as time has gone on, it is now the Pisgah National Forest. So of the original 108,000 acres, most of it has been returned to the federal government as a forest. And his principles for forestry ended up helping the situation coast to coast, because many places have been clear cut. I bring this up to say that doesn't go against what this message says. Americans take control over their environment. They do whatever, but then they learned what happened to go from there, and that created another opportunity so that we can overcome those limitations. So we don't view things as being a reason to stop. It's just another puzzle to solve, and hopefully we'll be better because of it.
That's good.
Yeah. So anyway, there you go. Oh, fine. Bye, everybody. Talk again soon. Take care.
And to think, T, it started off with you and me.
Well, yeah, absolutely, man. Me and you. That was good. Okay. Thanks,
Have a
everybody.
good day, everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.